Welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
We are asking everyday civilians to stand up to gunmen because our lawmakers are too cowardly to stand up to gun makers. And that is trauma that will last a lifetime. And 20 people were shot yesterday in Monterey Park, but in America, over 300 were shot and killed or wounded.
Yeah.
That is a crisis in this country. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death among children in America. We should be ashamed. But more than that, we should be motivated to act, to wrap our arms around these communities that have suffered. But every community, we are asking everyday civilians to stand up to gunmen because our lawmakers are too cowardly to stand up to gun makers. And that is trauma that will last a lifetime. And 20 people were shot yesterday in Monterey Park, but in America, over 300 were shot and killed or wounded.
Yeah.
That is a crisis in this country. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death among children in America. We should be ashamed, but more than that, we should be motivated to act, to wrap our arms around these communities that have suffered. But every community is not immune now to gun violence, right? If it hasn't happened to you where you live, I am sad to tell you that it is coming because this is America and gun violence is out of control. We all have to demand our lawmakers act at every single level of government, from school board to city council to state house to Congress. Become an activist, get involved in this issue, and make it a #1 voting priority because our lives are on the line.
That was Shannon Watts on MSNBC recently. Shannon is the founder of Moms Demand Action, a grassroots group fighting against gun violence. With 10 million supporters and a chapter in every state, Moms Demand Action and its partner, Everytown for Gun Safety, have stopped the NRA's priority legislation and passed hundreds of gun safety laws across the country, most notably the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first gun safety bill in 26 years. It has also changed corporate policies and educated Americans about secure gun storage. Shannon is also an active board member of Emerge America, which recruits and trains women to run for office, and Advance Peace, a community-based organization that works to end cyclical and retaliatory gun violence in American urban neighborhoods. She was named one of Glamour's 2022 Women of the Year, and her book, Fight Like a Mother, How a Grassroots Movement Took on the Gun Lobby and Why Women Will Change the World, was released in May of 2019. Shannon, welcome into the back room.
Thank you.
It's a real honor to have you here. I think what you do is really important, and it just seems like that job just gets more and more important every day, especially in the last couple of weeks. It's just like a never-ending series. It just seems like all the time now there are shootings, and sadly, I guess that's because there are, right? I mean, it just doesn't ever seem to stop. But before we get into your work and the state of gun violence in this, I noticed something in your Twitter profile which piqued my interest. It said shrill Harridan. And I've never seen that word before. Shrill, I've seen. And so I looked it up, and basically it's kind of like I guess the Urban Dictionary version is like angry, unpleasant woman, scolding, vicious woman, hag or shrew. And I think Kurt Schlichter is the guy who called you that. By the way, he trolls me all the time, but he's never called me that.
Many people. He was one of them. But also there were some NRA spokespeople who used that word. I had never heard of the word Harridan either, because I guess I don't read the Bible enough. But I thought...
Who doesn't?
It was such a great term, and I loved it. And just adding shrill to it makes it even better.
Yeah, and I love that you added it to your profile. So now you own it. It's yours.
Thank
but it's
you.
funny.
I'm going to trademark that.
One of my political heroes of the last few years is Rick Wilson, who's come over from the dark side and really helped defeat Trump and is fighting Trumpism. But I remember listening to him once on TV, and he used a word that was homunculus, which means like really, really small person. And the way it rolled off his tongue, I looked, I was like, what is and I was like, this is an amazing word. So I love when I come across words that I've never heard before that, or at the same time funny and like really edgy and angry and pejorative. So you run Moms Demand Action. It's a full-time gig, volunteer, no pay. You don't take pay.
Exactly.
I'm just curious, like, what was behind that? I mean, I guess maybe there's an obvious answer, but maybe there isn't an obvious answer, or there's a couple of answers. But I'm curious why that was important to you.
Well, when I first started doing this work, we didn't have much funding at all. And so the idea that I would take funding
Mm-hmm.
before the other volunteers who wanted to leave their jobs and do this work, that didn't seem appropriate or even possible. And then, the more that reports came out that people like Wayne LaPierre, lobbyists for the NRA, were making millions and millions of dollars. I'm not a gun violence survivor, and I just wanted the juxtaposition between, these corrupt, highly
Mm-hmm.
paid lobbyists versus me, right? A stay-at-home mom. My husband had been really gracious in supporting our family of 7 for the last decade. I will probably go back to work,
Is
right?
that including pets, or are those mostly
there
children?
are 2 pets, yes, 2 dogs. So, kudos to my husband.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it just was more about, sending the signal of I'm a stay-at-home volunteer
Mm-hmm.
mom who is taking on this issue because I care about kids, as opposed to the lobbyists of the gun lobby.
Mm-hmm. I also read something about you. It was a reference, along the lines of you not putting yourself above the volunteers. Like you showed up one day for a meeting or something, or a rally, and someone handed you a box and was like, "Here, put these pamphlets out," or something. And you did it, and they had no idea who you were. And it probably would have horrified them, I guess, had they known who they were talking to. But the fact that you just took it and did it, that's impressive.
I think it's so important that this is an organization for volunteers, run by volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was such a fun and important moment, because it made me realize that this organization wasn't about me,
Mm-hmm.
clearly, and, that it would last into perpetuity, because these volunteers were taking this brand, this purpose, this commitment into their own hands, and they were making it something that I never imagined it could be.
That's really interesting, and you've grown to 10 million supporters and chapters in every state of the country. I mean, that's really incredible. What were you doing when the light bulb went off? I know you were sort of motivated by, not sort of, I guess, motivated by Sandy Hook, but what were you doing in life then? What was your work, and what made you say, okay, this is the time to walk away from that and do this?
Yeah, I had been a corporate communications executive for over a decade, working at Fortune 100 companies and agencies, really cut my teeth on creating messages and writing speeches and building brands. And I was just getting married for the second time, and we were blending our family of 5 kids, 3 of mine, 2 of my husband's. And also I had some kids in middle school, and it just felt like a really good time to keep a closer eye on them. So I thought I'll take a 5-year break and then go back to work. And it was at the very end of that 5 years, I had just started thinking about what I would do next, that I was at home in my Indiana bedroom folding laundry, and I saw on the TV set that was on in the background that there was an active shooter inside a Connecticut elementary school. And I'm sure, like so many Americans that day, I sort of just sat down where I was and watched this unfathomable tragedy unfold, that 20 children and 6 educators could be slaughtered in the sanctity of an elementary school. Was hard to even now wrap my mind around. And I was devastated and crying all day. And I went to bed just so sad. And something happened while I was sleeping, because I woke up so angry, just so outraged. And I didn't know what to do with all that anger. So I went online and I thought, okay, I'm going to find something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, but for the issue of gun safety. And I am going to get involved. I've never been an activist before. I'm going to get involved. And what I found were only these one-off think tanks, mostly run by men in DC, some state and city organizations mostly run by men, but nothing connected. I wanted to be a part of a badass army of women, kind of like MAD, that spanned the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started a Facebook page with that idea, And because type A women are so indomitable, it became the largest grassroots movement in the country.
It's incredible. And, it's as a sidebar, we hear so much these days about how awful and evil Facebook is. And I think people need to remember that there's a lot of stories like this that were born out of social media and Facebook in particular. I'm not excusing the other stuff, but
Yeah.
hopefully someday we get to a point where the bad stuff goes away and more good stuff is happening. When I see something like a Sandy Hook or I'm friends with Fred Gutenberg and his daughter Jamie, died in Parkland and Uvalde. When I hear thoughts and prayers, not the time, good guys with guns, it drives me insane. I mean, I get so angry. Is there one of those expressions or something else that when you hear, like, which of those maybe drives you craziest when you hear it and motivates you more than anything to do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, every time there's a horrific tragedy, people will say, "Oh, well, this city or this state has all the gun laws you want." Like, look at Chicago
Mm-hmm.
or look at California, and they still have gun violence. And it's so absurd. I mean, I live in California. Yes, we have strong gun laws compared to the rest of the country, not compared to Japan, right? It's all about the context. And there's still so much more that we can do in the state of California and that we will do. But this idea that somehow a state or a city creates strong gun laws, data shows that it reduces the amount of gun death and gun violence, but our whole country is made up of cities and states with invisible borders, right? Guns go across these borders as easily as cars do.
Sure. I mean, California, you have Arizona, you have Nevada. Like, if the gun laws are really lax there, which they are, people love guns in those states. It doesn't, I mean, not that it doesn't matter what California does, but it's not that impenetrable wall that the right makes it out to be or expects it to be in their rhetoric.
Yeah, we are all only as safe as the closest city or state with the weakest gun laws.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is what they refuse to want to accept or believe is that there is a direct correlation in the world between countries that have the strictest gun laws and those that have the fewest gun deaths, where it could be a controlled environment, unlike a California with an Arizona or California with a Nevada. The statistics are there, whether it's New Zealand, Australia, other places, Japan. Like, it's not rocket science. Why do you think Americans or a certain segment of the population is so resistant to the truth and the facts about guns and gun violence? What's at the bottom of it all?
Oh, I mean, I know it's that we have something no other peer nation has, and that is a gun lobby. And the gun lobbyists have essentially been given the ability to help write our nation's gun laws. And of course, they're going to write those laws to protect and benefit them financially, right? Anytime you have a wealthy, powerful special interest and you give them the seat at the table, they're just going to increase their own power and their own wealth. And no other nation has allowed that. The gun lobby has about a 15-year head start, right? We've been doing this work for about 10 years, but a lot of damage has been done. And that includes rhetoric that many people, and sadly, some of our lawmakers believe, right? This idea that a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun, the idea that more guns in more places make us safer. None of that is true. And we have to undo that. We have made a huge amount of progress. When I started doing this work 10 years ago, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. And in fact, we passed the first federal legislation in a generation this summer, and we had Republicans sign on to it. So I know that people get frustrated because they want overnight wholesale change, but the system is not set up for that. The system is set up for incremental change. It can be frustrating, it can be slow, but it is what leads to revolutions. When you have volunteers, mostly women, wearing red shirts who show up in the dozens and hundreds and stop bad legislation or pass good legislation or elect people to office who will be on the right side of this issue, That is how you force change.
Mm-hmm. And so as we were talking about at the open, it just seems like there's more and more and more and more gun violence lately than ever before. I don't know if that's, I mean, I guess it's true.
Yes.
It seems like that. And so then the question that I want to ask is why? Why in the last year or 2 or 3 or 5 is it just like spiraling out of control? Is there a correlation between that and the rhetoric coming from the right, the Trumpism and the white nationalism and radicalization of people in this country? Is it all just coming together in some witch's brew, Bermuda Triangle type way where like it's being manifested through gun violence?
I think it's two things. It's years and years of bad policy, including something called permitless carry. So, in the past decade, 25 states have passed permitless carry, all red states. That means that you can carry a hidden loaded handgun in public with no background check and no training. These laws are adamantly opposed by law enforcement, and yet gun extremists in those state houses are passing them. And the data shows that they kill people, right? They cause an increase in gun violence. So you have states that are weakening their gun laws, and for a long time, a federal government that did nothing, combined with the pandemic. So, Donald Trump was president during the pandemic. The gun lobby asked him to prioritize gun sales and consider them an essential business. And the ATF even approved curbside gun sales during a pandemic. And, we had this sort of calm before the storm because people weren't leaving their homes. And we thought, we're not seeing school gun violence. Well, that's because their schools aren't in session. We're not seeing public mass shootings. Well, that's because people aren't in public.
Right.
And yet there was all this increase of gun deaths behind closed doors, including suicides and domestic gun violence. And so when people started to slowly go back out into public, the logical outcome of those years and years of bad policy decisions culminated in easy access to guns and a huge increase in mental issues. I want to be clear, mental illness is not the reason for the gun violence crisis in this country. All of our peer nations struggle with mental illness. People who are mentally ill are much more likely to be victims than perpetrators. However, post-pandemic, we knew there would be mental problems and challenges. But yet, what our country does that no other country does is give people who are at risk to themselves or others easy access to guns.
Yeah, and the courts are also more pro 2A now in guns, right? I mean, like the judges that have been appointed are more right wing, and so the legislatively is in some ways more challenging, right? On a state by state.
It is more challenging in terms of the courts for sure because of again Donald Trump's presidency and the Supreme Court down to judge appointments and in some cases in red states judicial elections. It is definitely harder to protect the progress we make in the legislatures because it's constantly being challenged by gun extremists and gun extremist groups. We've had a lot of success in the appeals there, and we have a whole litigation team in our organization. But it's just another reminder of, we're not just talking about the election of Congress. We're also talking about judicial elections and then the elections of legislators who appoint judges.
So I know we have a couple more minutes with you left. I want to ask you, you're stepping down at the end of this year. You're moving on. I don't think I've read what on is defined as at this point. I mean, is there any idea what you might be doing when you leave Moms Demand Action? Running for office, maybe?
I don't know yet. It's possible. I never say never. I know whatever I end up doing, it will involve continuing to empower women to be leaders. But I believe the founder's role in any organization is finite, that I helped build this space where people gather, but it's the people who are gathering that make the difference. And in order for me to, I think for the organization to continue to make the progress it has, I need to step back, and that enables other people to step forward. It brings new energy and new ideas to the organization. As I mentioned, we're so large now. I know we will last into perpetuity, but I will continue my work with Moms Demand Action at the end of this year as a California volunteer.
And you do live in California, right?
Yes.
There's a Senate seat opening up, is there not, in California?
Well, I can assure you, I can break news on your show, which is that I will not be running for the Senate seat.
We'll take any news we can break. So I want to thank you. I wish you luck with whatever you do. I do hope sometime in this coming year you will come back on, because I'm sure there's going to be more issues to talk about and more legislation that's put forth. It is an important subject, too important. I do want to go on record and say I think you're neither shrill or a harridan, although I'm glad I've learned that. And that would probably make a great name for a punk band, wouldn't it? Shrill Harridan?
I do of women. I love it.
Yeah. So thank you again. You've been generous with your time, and I hope you come back and see us again sometime.
Thank you.
That's episode 38. If you like what you've been hearing, and even if you don't, let us know. We appreciate the feedback. You can leave us a message at 845-307-7446. Email us at backroomandy@gmail.com or tweet to me at Andy Ostroy. And when you listen, please take a quick moment to rate and review. It's very helpful. I want to thank my co-producer, engineer, and editor, Maddie Rosenberg, associate producer, Jen Hammoud, Cricket Langell for our artwork, Andy Hollander for our kick-ass music, Patricia Wind and the Epicurean for the Backroom Studio, and a big thank you again to our guest, Shannon Watts. So keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards. And we hope you'll join us again next time. Have a great week.